Where are the different places you have lived? Well, this goes back to when we were first married. I changed majors when I was in school from electrical engineering to mining engineering. So that meant I had to go to school an extra half semester. Reen and I were going to get married in June of '61. But when Reen realized, her head professor called her in and said, you know, you can graduate in January. And we said, well, why don't we just go ahead and get married right away? And so I got commissioned on Wednesday up at Idaho, and I got my ensign boards. And Reen was already down in Idaho Falls, and I drove on down there, and we got married on Saturday. We drove to Pocatello, Idaho, which was 50 miles away, had our honeymoon that night. Drove back to Idaho Falls, loaded up our car, and drove to San Francisco. We arrived in San Francisco. I got Reen indoctrinated with the Navy on Treasure Island. And a week later, I left. So I flew out to Hickam Air Force Base, and then made my way to Subic Bay, which is where my ship was, and that's where I caught my ship. Three months later, we were back in San Francisco. The best part about this though is during that period of time, our ship went into dry dock. The ammunition ship did. The executive officer called me into his office and he said, we're going into the shipyard when we get back to the States. A couple months after we get back, give everybody a chance to go on liberty and everything. But 2 months after we get back, and said, you're gonna go to school. He said, and then you're gonna take over, be in charge of the overhaul. And I said, okay, I'm a boot ensign, I've got 3 months experience, and I'm gonna be in charge of the overhaul? I said, what do I do? He said, you'll figure it out. Now get out of here. You'll figure it out. That's the way the old-time Navy was. Now get out of here.
Did you figure it out?
Yes.
You found out who his best friends were.
I've located myself a chief petty officer that knew what's going on and been through it before, and the chief and I knew, and got the job done. Well, the next place we moved was Concord, California. And that's when our ship was going through overhaul. And so every day there were 3 of us that lived in the same apartment building. And we would take turns driving up to the north side. We'd go across the bridge up to Sausalito, up north there, and Vallejo,
Oh, okay.
Vallejo shipyard. That's where it was. We had to drive up there every day and back down every night. It was quite a drive. Reen got pregnant right after I got back from that first 3 months. During that 3 months, while I was at sea, Reen wrote me a letter and said that she had an offer to teach. She had an offer for a contract. She did well enough as a student teacher to teach in this high school. She wrote me a letter and she said, I need to know what to do about this offer that I've got here for this contract. And so I wrote back to her and I said, well, our ship is going to be in Japan on this day. And I will make arrangements to call you. Now, the way you made a long distance phone call back then was you put a call in through the operator of who you wanted to call. And they would tell you, okay, it's probably going to take 20 minutes to a half an hour to get this set up. So you go sit in the lobby or wherever it is you are, and we will announce when the call is ready to go. And I then sat in the lobby and I waited, and pretty soon a guy came through with a sign, Ensign Syring, Ensign Syring phone call. So I got in this phone booth and I had a whole bunch of quarters in front of me. And the operator said, the charge for this call will be, I think it was something like $8 or something, all in quarters. So I had to put all these quarters in. And then she said, okay, you've got 3 minutes. I will let you know when there's 20 seconds left. So Reen and I had to talk real fast. And she said, what do you think we should do? And I said, well, I don't know about you, Reen, but I would really like to start our family. And Reen said, I was hoping you'd say that. Now, it's not that we had a lot of money. I was making $164 a payday.
I thought I was rich lately.
and so she turned down the contract.
Yeah.
And so when we got back, she must have gotten pregnant the very first night, because now, 9 months later, we're getting ready to take off again for another cruise of 7 months. I really had mixed feelings about this, because I was going to be the navigator on this cruise, and I just loved the celestial navigation, like I was telling you. And but at the same time, I was going to be gone. But fortunately, just before we left, I got a change of orders, and that sent me to the second ship I went aboard, and that was the destroyer escort out of Portland, Oregon. Bob was born, and I took off for this 8-month cruise. And the only way we shared anything is Reen would just keep me updated. She would mail me pictures. So we moved up to Portland, and Reen is pregnant.
Again.
again. And that whole time goes by. John F. Kennedy is still the president. A week before our second child is born, John F. Kennedy is assassinated.
Yeah.
So now, a week later, they didn't have military hospitals big back then, and like they do now. There was this little Air Force hospital that Reen used to go to for her doctor checkups and all that. The day that Jim was born, I told Reen, we better get going. I can tell you're gonna be delivered. No, she wanted to hang on. And so it was icy out.
Yeah.
And so, but I drove her to the hospital anyway. I fell asleep in the lobby, okay? A little while later, I woke up and I got a hold of a doctor and told him who I was. He said, oh, your wife delivered an hour ago.
Longer than that ago.
Some time ago. And what? And so I went back there and what do they call it? The maternity ward?
The nursery.
The nursery where the little kiddos were. There were 3 kiddos in the nursery. And now bear in mind, this is an Air Force hospital and I'm Navy.
Not good. Not good.
And so the Air Force nurses were not around, and by God, I wanted to see my son, so I went back in the nursery. I'm looking at the name tags, looking for the right name. I found it, and this Air Force nurse came in and started reaming me out, and so we had a little tit for tat right there in the nursery.
He was probably thinking, what is this guy doing in here?
Exactly.
I had decided, however, that if I was going to stay in the Navy, I wanted to be in the new branch of the Navy, and that was the nuclear submarine Navy. The Nautilus had just been commissioned in 1955. This was 1963 now. And she was still like brand new. And I went back, Reen and I went back to visit our parents for Christmas in 1963. And my twin brother George, who was also in the Navy, he was serving aboard destroyers on the East Coast. And I told him about our decision to stay in the Navy. And I said, and I'm applying to go into the nuclear power program. And he said, you're not going to get it. I said, why not? He said, because you didn't go to the Naval Academy. Well, my first year in ROTC, the spring of my freshman year in college, I got the primary appointment to go to the Naval Academy. This is before I met Reen. I didn't meet her until my sophomore year. But I decided I turned it down. I loved being at Idaho, and I figured I'm going to get a USN commission, a regular commission, not a reserve commission. I'm going to get a regular commission just like guys from the Naval Academy. And so I turned it down. I thought my dad was going to have a cow.
You should have.
I really did. I thought he was going to have a cow. So, but I bring that up now because it was relevant to what happened later. George said, "You're not going to get accepted for the nuclear power program because all they're taking now are academy graduates." I said, no. Sure enough, came back, not approved. And I was so angry. And I acted impulsively. And you talk about what advice do I give younger children at this point in time? And that is, do not act impulsively. Wait 3 days. Wait 3 days before you make any important decision. I wish I had stayed in. Let me tell you the kicker to the story now. So we left the Navy and we're heading back to Indiana to work in the steel mills. I got a job as a engineer in the steel mills in Gary, Indiana. And on the way, we stopped in Reen's hometown of Idaho Falls, Idaho. And Idaho Falls, Idaho is right outside of where the Navy trains all their nuclear engineers out in the desert. And I get a phone call this one night, and it's the personnel guy out at Westinghouse at the nuclear reactor site, and he wanted me to come out for a job interview. Westinghouse was one of the companies that I applied to go to work for. And it took a while for it to make it through their different divisions. But it got to this division, and they said they wanted me to learn how to run nuclear reactors out at the site and then teach the Navy personnel that were going through there to go aboard submarines. The Navy wouldn't take me into the submarines, but now I'm going to be teaching them to go aboard the submarines. The irony of that. I was in the reserves for active duty and active reserves for 13 years.
Okay.
And I made the rank of lieutenant commander.